Let's start a bite. Again, I'm sorry, my name is Mike Eggplants. I have been a vegetable gardener for well over 50 years, mostly learned by the School of Hard Knocks until Master Gardeners came along, and then the knocks got really hard. No, Master Gardeners have been great. I think I've been doing it now for 5 or 6 years. And again, I mostly grow vegetables, and so my talk and presentation on seed starting is mostly related to vegetables. Another thing about starting vegetables from seed, it's relatively easy. But you may have read about, starting some of the, for example, the natives, things like that require very special conditions, or they require, there's seeds that require to be burned over, or if you're doing it artificially, chemically treated, or physically damaged in order to germinate. Well, vegetable seeds don't require, in general, a whole lot of stuff. There are exceptions, depending on your situation, the type of seeds in the soil. But first off, let's start with a quiz question. What are the 2 vegetables used to make vichyssoise? I think that was the first. What else? Potatoes. I think we got 2 people. I won't make you share.
Adult candy.
I won't make you share. I should, because each of you got half. I remember last year. But no, I'm in a good mood today, so we won't make you share. So let's talk about seeds first. Seeds, sources of seeds. I've got some sample catalogs here which you can pass around. Mostly I've told them to stop sending me catalogs, and I do it online to try to be ecological. Seeds are like fishing lures. Any fishermen here? So you know that what they say about a tackle store, the lures catch a lot more fishermen than fish. I like to go tuna fishing and salmon fishing, and it's true. Well, seed catalogs are just like that. So one of the things I would say, if you're starting vegetables from seeds, and over the years I've probably tried so many different varieties and so many different types of things, and what I have found is settle on a few things that you decide that you and your family like to eat, and stick with it. And then you won't. I've in the past had all kinds of seeds sitting in my refrigerator, and half of them never get used. They look good in the catalog, but they never get used. The other thing, there was a question earlier about seed. And by the way, if there are any questions, just jump in anytime. One of the things that was talked about earlier was saving seeds. You can save seeds in a jar, in the pack, in the refrigerator. Make sure they don't freeze, and you can keep seeds for years. Some seeds will tend to decrease in their vigor and will not germinate at the highest percentage, but you compensate for that. For example, if you're doing lettuce, one little pack of lettuce like this, this is enough seed. It's minimum 500 seeds. 500 lettuce seeds lasts me 5 years, 10 years. And as the lettuce seed starts to decline in its vigor, just plant more of them. Plant more of them in each little container, and if you get too many, thin them out. Anyway, the seed catalog people don't like that, because instead of buying seeds every year, maybe every few years, but it works. Freeze. Hybrid seed, it doesn't matter. You can still store it and keep it. You can't harvest it and expect to get the same plant coming, but you can certainly store it, and since hybrid seed tends to be more expensive, so much the better if you can keep it going from year to year. Depending on the seed, many of them you just start in the soil, in the garden, in particular things like squash, Yeah, radish, beets, a lot of things will do better if you start them in the soil. Although you can start them in containers. Like I've read, you can't start beets in a container because as a root vegetable it doesn't work. Well, I can tell you it does work. I've started beets in a container and I plant them, and when it comes time to harvest, you got this kind of funny looking beet and it's growing roots in every different direction. But it's okay. It roasts up just fine. Tastes great. A lot of it depends on where you're at. Are any North County folks here? Yeah. So you're very seasonal. You get frost. You get some cold times and some warm times. So you have to be careful about selecting your varieties. I live in Arroyo Grande where most things will grow most of the year. So pay attention to that in picking your seed in terms of days to maturity for your vegetables, etc.
I had a quick question about that. So you're looking at a pumpkin, it says 120 days. Does that mean you put the seed in the ground and in 120 days, so when you're timing it to be ready for Halloween? What about that?
Usually on stuff like that, it's not 100%. You really got to pay attention to the seed packet and even look it up online, but usually what I've seen, it's days from transplant. So if you start your pumpkin like in a little container, and then it'll take a few days to germinate, and then a few more days till you start getting true leaves and form a root ball, and you're ready to transplant it. Usually, in my experience, they're talking days to transplant. But again, pay attention to the seed packet. Same thing with people always ask about planting depth. Excuse me. I love the thing about, what is it, the half the diameter of the seed and plant it that deep. Last time I looked at a squash seed, is it this diameter or is it this diameter? I don't know. So again, this is one of those things, it's not a real good man thing, but follow the directions on the seed packet, It actually usually works. Some seeds, the other thing to pay attention to with some seeds is light requirements. There are some seeds, like lettuce, that in theory does not really want to germinate unless it has some good light exposure. The way you're going to get in trouble with that is if you just plant it too deep. So, be careful about that. And some super small seeds, like basil, for example, you literally just press them into the growing medium. Just press them down into the growing medium and keep them moist with some mist, and you're good to go. You don't even really cover them per se, like with other types of seeds. Some other little specialty things I have. Until another master gardener, maybe it was Kathy, teach me this trick about pea seeds in paper towels, pea seeds in paper towels. It wasn't you? Okay. Anyway, a wise master gardener, I in my soil, just the nature of my soil and I guess whatever pathogens are in it or whatever, I was never able to get snap peas. You all know what snap peas are. I was never able to get snap peas to properly grow. I couldn't get them to really germinate. But I discovered, I was advised and discovered that if you take those seeds, those snap pea seeds, you take a pie plate, wet paper towel, lay the seeds on top, another wet paper towel, and keep it moist. And when that root just starts to peek up and starts to sprout, then you plant them in a furrow in your garden and they grow beautifully. I get like 90% survival. So there are little specialty things and specialty tricks that you may have to try depending on your own soil and the variety of plant. I would just sow straight in the garden, like squash, beets, probably things like carrots. And there's some things that I think will definitely do better if you start them in containers. All your tomatoes, your peppers, your eggplants, melons. Again, there's a question on melons, but I find that I do better with melons. I use these little 6-pack containers, and actually when I'm done with them, I'll actually just wash them out with soap and water and reuse them, and they seem to do just fine for maybe 2 or 3 plantings. If I'm doing something that's really sensitive, like I'm starting tomatoes and tomato rootstock to do grafting, then I'll start with stuff that's completely clean, you know, fresh from the manufacturer. But otherwise, you know, usually you can get away with 2 or 3. You can also you can use any sort of container that'll hold soil and that will have drainage. You can use Dixie cups with some little holes in the bottom. It's not really a big deal. Any other questions on seeds? Yes, ma'am.
Soil blocking.
Soil blocking. I'm not sure what you're referring to.
It's like a press.
Oh, okay.
You know, you put
Okay.
you know, is that like a thing that?
Yeah, you can try it if it works.
But that's not something that you're.
I
do this.
I do this.
And this is work.
I have done those little peat cylinders, and you wet them and they expand up, and I've done those. I used to have a little, I don't know what you call it, a little form where you could literally wrap newspaper and make little pots out of newspaper. You know, I've done most of those things, and they all can work. No reason not to. But I just came back to this, for me, is the simplest and easiest thing. Soil itself, what you're putting in here, in general, you probably are better off using a commercial mix. I'm not recommending any particular mix, but this is just a good quality potting soil that I happen to stumble upon at Cherry Lane Nursery in South County, and that's what I use. I've even tried some of the professional seed starting mixes that some of the commercial growers will use, like Pro Mix and so forth. And frankly, I don't think they do any better than just a good potting soil. Virtually all of you can pass this stuff around. Virtually all of the potting soil seed starting mixes will have as their base some sort of a mixture, of peat perlite and vermiculite. The 3 main ingredients. I'm going to ask two questions that I asked the last group. We'll see who knows the answers, but since I know they cheated, no prizes for this one. So who knows the difference between perlite and vermiculite?
One holds more water.
Go ahead.
One of them holds more water.
That's correct. Perlite is basically designed to add drainage. Vermiculite holds water. Okay, so another thing you can do with vermiculite potentially is you can grind it up fine and put it on top of those very tiny seeds, just so to help hold a little more moisture on them. The other thing, though, that I would advise, particularly if you buy any of these in vermiculite, if you're making your own stuff, if you get any vermiculite or perlite in bulk and you're pouring it or working with it, wear a respirator mask, wear a particle mask. Do not work with vermiculite or perlite to any great extent without respiratory protection. They're mined. They're a mineral product. Like the perlite, I forget, it's some sort of a volcanic product, as I recall, and then they superheat it, and I think the perlite is sort of almost pops like popcorn, I guess. But they're both mineral products that are mined. And again, you really don't want to be breathing them to any great extent. So,
I have a quick seed saver question.
yes.
I grow lots of peppers, and they're all open pollinated. And I've never known if I can save those seeds if they're right next to each other. Try that. Cayenne next to it. Anaheim next to it.
Yeah, I guess the answer to that is depending on how they pollinate. You could conceivably get some new hybrid variant, but why not? How many of us have to pay our mortgage by what we sell out of our garden? Okay. 100%. So again, yeah, don't get uptight about it. Don't worry about it. Try it. See what happens. But
Do you plant your cucumber directly in the ground, or do you put them in pots?
I usually plant cucumbers from a container. Usually. And the other thing,
What was the answer, Mike?
I'm sorry.
Cucumber
I usually plant them from a container. Cucumbers. However, and another little thing with melons and cucumbers and some of those things, sometimes what I'll do, again, because you got plenty of seeds in the pack, what I will do is I will plant them like cucumbers and melons. I have like technically it's a high hoop with agricultural plastic. People call it the greenhouse. It's not technically a greenhouse, but nevertheless, it's a warm high hoop for growing usually my melons, peppers, eggplants, although I'm usually not that successful with eggplants. But what I'll do is I'll plant directly in the ground within the high hoop, but then I'll have on the side, I'll have some containers with the same plant sprouting just in case. And then if it doesn't take in the ground, something happens to it, then I've got a backup. And if it grows and it's doing better than what's in the container, then I give the container to my neighbor. Peas and beans, they attract or generate organisms in their roots that fix nitrogen. Okay, so it's like they're self-fertilizing in a sense that way. And I believe that the pea inoculant is basically like a spore of that. So it speeds up that process of the nitrogen fixing bacteria.
Okay.
And I have tried it once or twice, and I've never known it to make a difference. So that's personal.
No, that's.
I can't quote you a UCANR certified paper that shows the graph here, there, the other place. Yes, sir.
Well, I just started a tray of corn, and I've heard the debate of you got to go in the ground. Some people are like, try it in a tray. Have you had good luck in a tray with corn?
I do not grow corn.
Okay.
My neighbor does it straight in the
I used to grow corn, and I put it straight in the ground, and very rarely I will occasionally put in a few ornamental corn plants. But I do not grow corn, so I really can't comment. And
I've always gone in the ground. This is my first year in a tray, so I'll
yeah.
let you know. I guess.
Yeah, let me know how it goes. And I'll tell you the reason I don't grow corn, and it goes back to picking seeds. Part of the reason we do this, besides the SAM and getting us away from cable TV and all that kind of stuff, is you grow stuff that you like to eat, and in particular, I grow stuff that even if I go to the farmer's market, I cannot get the same taste, the same quality, the same varieties that I can grow. And what I found, and at least maybe it's just my dull taste buds, but with the new hybrid sweet corns that you get at any of the stands or even in the market, I really, truly can't grow anything better. I mean, maybe less pesticides, but I don't really eat a lot of pesticides other than that corn anyway. And I really can't grow, personally, I can't grow anything that's better than what I can buy, so I just buy it. The other thing about corn, have you grown corn much in the past?
Mm-hmm.
So you know it can be buggy, corn earworms, and you have to deal with those, and you also need to plant it in fairly large blocks. Otherwise you don't get much corn. Everybody aware of that? Corn is a wind pollinated plant, and you have to have a block. If you just plant a row of corn and the wind blows through, the pollen goes out there and you don't get any corn. You have to plant a block of corn, and it takes up a fair amount of space. Actually, one of my first plots, I was about 12 years old, and I was living on the chicken ranch, and my folks gave me a plot to work with, and I said, I'm going to grow corn, and I'm going to pay for my college education.
No, I was sent to North Dakota
that
a
work
lot,
for you?
picking weeds in the cornfield.
There you go. So anyway, that was my first foray into vegetable gardening. So I grew this plot of corn, and you talk about the school of hard knocks. I think I planted them about that close together. And they also were shaded by a big chicken house. So I grew this stand of bamboo. And I sent a lot of nice young corn earworm moths out into the world. And I think I got about 4 usable stalks of corn and decided I was going to have to get a scholarship or something to go to college. But I never gave up on gardening.
Comment on that.
Yeah.
My husband is the one who grows his corn. And he soaks it overnight, and then he puts it in the trays. And then it grows, and then sometimes he waters it, and sometimes he forgets, and I water it, and it grows great. And then he sticks it in the ground when it gets big. Our neighbor is a big corn grower, Don Sparks, you know him from the farmer's market. He sells corn at the farmer's market. And that's how Mark learned how to do it.
Is he next to your property?
Yes.
Well, you're getting good pollination probably
Right.
his corn, which is really good.
So I say try it. But
By all means. Hey, like I say, you guys know as much about a lot of this stuff as I do. One thing about when you're planting in containers, a problem that I've run into is that if you just take the potting soil dry out of the bag, sometimes it is so dry that what happens is you put it in these containers, you plant your seed, cover it up, you start watering it, and everything looks okay. But really, because of, I guess it's the lack of capillary action or whatever, you're taking me way back to my chemistry classes, what will happen is the water will trickle down through, but it'll leave lots of dry voids. And then your seeds will sprout, but then they're straggly and they don't look good, and you know, after a couple of weeks you pull one out and you look and you essentially have no root ball. Okay, and that's because the potting soil wasn't sufficiently wet. So it's not a medical issue, but potting soil, I like to mix it by hand, and potting soil gets in your fingernails and under your cuticles, and it's just yuck. Anyway, so let me just do a little demo here. When you're working with your potting soil, I would mix in, to start with, a little bit of water. Mix it up really well. And what you're trying to do is get to a consistency, it's about like that. It'll crumble, but it's just moist. I would liken it to like a kitchen sponge. That you wet the kitchen sponge and then you wring it out. And it's kind of that sort of level of dampness is a pretty good level of moisture to start seedlings. And that's about where you want to keep your seedlings as they germinate also. You don't want to be too soggy, too much moisture, and you're going to get what's called damping off, which is a fungal disease that, and you'll see like the base of your plant, it'll come up and then it'll start to kind of get girdled and look not so good, and then your plants will collapse. And the usual cause of that, I mean, it's a soil organism, but the usual cause is that you've had too much moisture and not enough air circulation. So I have filled up this 6-pack with my soil mix. Give it a little tamp down, not much, not very heavy. You're not trying to squeeze it down to a brick. And I've got some lettuce here. This is a little gem hybrid with the seeds are like 2 years old. They've been sitting in the refrigerator. This is like a small butter lettuce. And I'm gonna put extra seeds on here. I'm getting maybe 6, 8, 10 seeds.
In each cell?
Yes, in each cell. And there are, you know, fancy little gizmos that you could use to help plant your seeds and stuff. I usually just do it all by hand. And cover it with a little more of the moist soil. Just a little bit. Lettuce seeds, you know, they say about a 1/4 inch. And tamp that down a little bit. And then we're going to ask another question. How many potato varieties are there worldwide? Anybody want to guess?
Over 100?
150.
1,000.
She's the one that has the answers.
I was gonna say she gets a prize just for being a wise guy. 223. Who said 1,000? You're the closest.
I love my gift. Thank you.
You keep the closest. It's actually about 5,000 varieties. Anybody know the origin of the potato?
The Andes?
Yes, Peru. The Andes.
Yep.
And if you
He gives some lettuce too.
Ireland, actually,
Just this week.
I think it's this week. It's Ireland, but actually, I believe that potatoes actually came to Ireland from the south of Europe, from Spain or Italy, I think. But originally from South America. And if you see pictures, if you've ever traveled in South America or you've seen pictures, I mean, in our markets, you'll see maybe 5 varieties of potatoes,
Right.
the little red ones and the big russets and some white ones and some this and that. I mean, in their markets, it's like endless varieties of potatoes. So anyway, you get the potato prize for getting the closest. Those should start to germinate 3 or 4 days. You should start to see something come up.
Ask me next week.
Keep it that moist, and we'll.
See you this weekend.
And if we see you Saturday, you
I'll be
can
here
tell me.
Saturday.
Tell me if it's.
When you're talking about keeping it moist, just,
Spray it, mist it.
yeah, mist, put it in a tray where there's water, let it soak water up.
You know, some people will do that. I tend not to do that because I'm not totally sure that I'm getting the
Gotcha.
top layer as much.
Okay.
And what I do a lot of times, particularly if they're not super covered, if there's not a lot of cover and I'm worried about washing them away, the trick I've developed is I have a small watering can and I literally take a wet paper towel and put it over the spout
Gotcha.
and then water like that, and it just kind of drips. You could also get I guess a small watering can with just a little one of those little spray heads. You know
Oh,
what I
right,
mean?
okay, yeah.
You could try that as well. But I found very very effective to like I say, use the spout with a clean wet paper towel and just let it sort of drip until it just starts to come out the bottom, and then. And as far as how many times a week people ask to water, it depends. I mean,
Well, you said it's moist. You can just put your finger in one of those.
You
6.
just look at it
Yeah.
and see, and that's about the moisture level you want to keep it
Right.
at. That sort of just wrung out sponge kind of level.
Goes on.
Well,
No
if
matter
you're-
what you put on the end.
I don't know. I mean, if you're planting coconuts, it's probably okay.
How about with the mister? Is that I do that on my hose?
You can do a mister. That's absolutely fine. I stopped. I was using a mist bottle, particularly on things like lettuce. The problem is it just takes so long with mist to get that
Right,
much
right.
water onto it.
But you build up your forearm strength.
Do that.
Popeye.
Yeah.
Don't even need spinach.
So you didn't put any perlite or anything extra in that potting
Nope.
soil?
This is just a straight up good quality potting soil from one of the nurseries. And like I say, I've tried all kinds of stuff, and I've started starting mix. I've started pro mix. I've made my own. I've done everything, and truthfully, I haven't found anything better than this. And again, seeds. The other thing we talked about with the other group, your seeds do not need fertilizer until they're up and they're starting to produce generally their first true leaves. And then when they are, you're obviously going to leave them in the container long enough to where they pretty much start to fill up the container with a root ball. Okay, you don't want it to go to the point where the roots start crawling up the sides and swirling around and getting root bound. And if you do have plants that are slightly root bound, when you pull them out, you can literally take your fingernail and sort of break up those roots Okay, the ones that are
Yeah.
encircling, you can break up those roots and try planting it, and usually it'll do fine. But the object is to just get that container filled with roots, but not root bound. Like half strength, Miracle Grow. I don't know, whatever Miracle Grow is.
10, 10, 10. So then you make a 5, 5, 5 out of it.
Yeah, you make a 5 by 5 out of it. Yes.
And do you dilute it? I mean, do you water it with it, or do you sprinkle it?
I actually, I'll do one of two things. I have a big 2-gallon, 1.5 2-gallon watering can, and I will fill that up and add about a tablespoon and a half of that, you know, the blue stuff, the Miracle granules. Mix that up, and then use that, put that in the smaller watering can. Whatever's left over, I'll throw on a tree or something. That's what I usually will do. Type of fertilizer, you can actually get little sprayers where you just put the dry in the jar, and as you spray, it automatically gives you that'll give you like a full dilution, but it's not a. I say half, but you're not going to hurt anything with the full dilution. Other questions?
The libraries, there's like 5 or 6 of the libraries do seed exchanges,
Yeah,
and they do give you a little more reasonable amount. I mean, because you're getting it for free,
sure.
but you can get up to 10 from each of the libraries each season.
Hey, good
I haven't bought seed in forever.
advice. Pardon me?
I haven't bought seed in forever. What's this?
Yeah.
And so the Native Garden, they send seeds there, and then there's some people it'll just say Avila, Bob Smith, you know, pear, tomatoes, or whatever on there.
Yeah.
But then, so it's random, and you get to go through it. And sometimes it's flowers, sometimes it's, you know, vegetables.
Did everybody hear that? It's talking about seed, I guess, seed exchange.
It's
where you-
actually a library. If you
Or
go
live
to
seed
the
library.
to their reference center, they'll point you in the right directions. But it's Los Osos, San Luis, AG, Napomo, and Shell Beach, and there's another one I can't remember what it is. Is it Laurel Bay? It might be.
Good advice. Yeah, I've never.
No, seriously.
The
they
seed
have
library is a
they
good
converted
idea.
the card
I personally
Oh,
have not
wow.
used it.
Right.
I go searching. Every so often I get a wild hair and I want to try something really strange. Like there's this funny beet that I tried this year. I couldn't help myself.
What was it called?
It's
The candy?
something Egyptian.
No.
And it's doing terribly. But I had to go looking. You know, I read about it, and then so I went looking, and I finally found online, which is another good source. I found online a seed company that seems to specialize in exotic things that don't really want to grow. So, we talked about the soil. We talked about the seeds, sun. Once your seeds are up, you know you've probably heard 6 hours minimum sunlight, and in my experience, that's an absolute minimum. Most vegetables want all the sun you can possibly give them for as long as you can give them. I have also found, and maybe Kathy knows more about this than I do, but I have not been able to find any real science literature on it. But for example, I personally, in my experience, I would never plant squash at this time. Well, in November or October. It seems to require increasing day length, like this time of year onward, in order to do well. I mean, if I try to plant squash, summer squash, in October, November, it'll come up, it'll sprout, and it'll sort of languish. But if I plant it this time of year, even if the temperatures are relatively the same, it seems to just really go crazy and do well. And of course, those of you who live in North County, you have to be attentive to seasons and temperature, whereas in Arroyo Grande, like I say, there's some things that I'll plant in the spring and summer, squash, melons, peppers, things like that, and some things like lettuce that you just plant whenever your last crop is starting to run out and you feel like it. see, some seal soils. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention for the other group, labels. When you're growing stuff in containers, label it, put the date you seeded it, put the variety, etc. I'm notoriously good at not doing that. Yeah, it's broccoli. Yep, I get it. It's broccoli. All right, one more question, and then we'll call it a day. Which country grew the first oranges? Anybody?
Spain. Was it Spain? Iran.
Not we did.
For a kind many. Keep naming countries.
Iraq.
Guatemala.
Saudi Arabia.
It's in the cradle of civilization.
Italy.
Who said China? Oh!
I know what the first one is.
All right, thank you, folks. If any other questions, I'm
The heat
happy
mat,
to.
which you have, is that?
Oh, yes. These heat mats, used as is, will generally raise your seeds to about, they say, 10 degrees over ambient. Okay, so if it's warm, if it's cold, or if it's very cold or very warm, you probably want to put it on a thermostat. And you can get a thermostat with a little probe that'll turn it on and off. They're not that expensive, and they're pretty reliable. I've used. I would have brought one to show you, but it's actually in use right now, trying to propagate some eggplant. But in general, particularly in the evenings, it'll tend to raise things about 10 degrees. Most of your vegetables, if you're starting your seeds somewhere in the low 70s average temperature, you're probably okay. If you're doing something like eggplants or peppers, you probably want to go a little higher, maybe up to 80. And things like lettuce and your cold crops, at this time of year and in this climate, you could do them without a mat. They'll be perfectly happy. They might not sprout quite as fast, but they'll be perfectly happy. Whereas a lot of the things like what do you call it, the solanaceous crops, your peppers, your eggplants, your tomatoes, they will do better if you give them some supplemental heat.
Before we finish, can you show the book there, the propagation book? This is one that actually Kathy recommended to me, and it is a Bible when I'm looking at when I want to propagate something. Too Good is the last name on there.
Yeah.
And
Ellen Too Good, just like it sounds. T-O-O.
definitely worth investing in and you'll use it for a long time.
And it's not just seeds, it's like cuttings and different layering and everything you can think of.
Softwood,
Succulents, you name
when
it.
to do it, how to do it. It's excellent.
It's all there.
Take that picture.
So,